Good evening. Today we're going to be talking about administering Gitano. There are two major parts to administering Gitano, and we're going to talk about both of those, and then we're going to talk about a way to simplify administration a little bit. The first way to administer Gitano is to administer the whole instance itself, and that allows you to cover things like the users, the groups and the rules that govern the entire set of repositories that Gitano instance is storing. All of the global rules are stored in a repository called Gitano Admin, which if we clone now, we can go and have a look at. Gitano Setup created this repository for us when we first set up Gitano. You can see in here that there is a site.conf, that there are users, rules and groups. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the site.conf. As you can see, it's a fairly simple file which at the moment contains a site name and a log prefix. You may recall that we set exactly these names during the Gitano setup process. The log prefix is the string that is put on the left of messages that come out of Gitano, and the site name gets mentioned during the welcome. If, for example, we SSH to git at localhost and ask for help, then you will see that we get demo in square brackets at the start of every line, and that is the log prefix. We can easily change the log prefix by simply editing site.conf, changing the log prefix, saving, committing, and pushing that back to the Gitano server. As you can see, demo verified the new admin, and then example said everything was okay and processed it. Whenever you push a change to the Gitano admin repository, Gitano will walk through all of the repositories, applying any changes. It will update SSH authorized keys files as appropriate, and so on. This is quite a heavy operation, but Gitano does it as efficiently as it can. If we now have a look in the users directory, you can see the dsilvers user, which again we created during Gitano setup, and that's a directory as well. And inside there is a user.conf, which lists the real name and the email address that we gave during setup. And there is a file called default.key, which is the SSH public key that we handed to Gitano when we set up originally. More keys can be provided, and Gitano has an SSH key command for managing these. You can see that this key is called default. If we SSH to git at localhost and we ask for a list of SSH keys, then you can see that I have a default key that is dsilvers adata axia, which is exactly this key. Now we can add another key to this user, and we'll do so later when we look some more at the SSH key command. There are also groups. If we go and have a look in the groups directory, then you can see that each group is a file, and that file contains a description and the members of the group. Now every single .conf file that we've seen so far is managed using Clod, which was one of the components that we installed when we were installing Gitano. Clod is a configuration language, and it basically consists of keywords and values for those entries. Where you have this construct, it indicates that Clod is constructing a list, and each entry will be given that form. We'll look a little bit more at users and groups and site configuration when we play around a little bit later. There is one other thing that you can see here, and that is the rules directory. The rules directory contains the lace rules which govern how the repository is managed. All operations that require access control start at core.lace, and core.lace is a sequence of includes that run all of these different lace operations based on what is going on. So that's the global configuration that you get when you start Gitano. You can also get global hooks here, and if you look in the Gitano codebase in the examples directory, then you will, for example, find a global hook which is for notifying Jenkins of commits, and this hook is actually in use in various installations and does work. Okay, the second kind of configuration that Gitano lets you do is for each repository in turn. You may recall that in the last video we pushed a copy of Gitano to our local instance, which means that we have a repository called Gitano. If you look in the Gitano codebase in the scripts directory, then you'll notice a git admin clone script. This lets you get at what we call the admin ref of a repository in a neat and tidy way. So if we run that and we give it the local repository and we say that we want it cloned into admin ref of Gitano, then the script will do that for us. You may notice that the admin repository is in refs Gitano. This means that it will not be cloned by default, but it is also not private. And it's really important to remember that it isn't private. Anyone who has read access to the repository can gain read access to the refs Gitano admin ref. But let's go and have a look at what was inside there. We have a project.conf, which is another CLOD configuration. You may notice that there is a head, a description and an owner stated. This also shows you that CLOD does dotted configuration names as well. The head is the configuration of head in the repository. This is the ref that will automatically be checked out when someone clones your repository. By default, it's refs heads master, but you can change it to any other ref that you want. The project description is text that describes the repository. It should be a short description, and it's available with one of the Gitano SSH commands, Gitano ls, which if we just demonstrate that now, shows you which repositories you have access to, if you have read access and write access, the repository name, the head of that repository, and the description of the repository. As you can see, there's no description for the Gitano repository because project.description is empty. As with Gitano admin, we can simply edit these files, give them a description, change description commit, and when we push that, you will notice that it has applied all of the changes to the admin ref, and if we do the ls-v this time, there's our example description coming out. If you have a cgit installation, which is going to be the topic of another video later, then this information also shows up on the repository listing of cgit. There is also a rules directory which contains a main.lace. This is the core of the configuration for each repository. That's right, repository owners themselves can set rules up per repository if they so choose. The default is an empty rule set, i.e. that the rules are controlled entirely by the core Gitano admin, but you can add rules of your own there. You can also add local hooks here, which are all of the standard hooks that you'd expect, but they are controlled per repository. The Gitano codebase supplies you with an example project hook or local hook, which is to ensure that whenever you commit to refs heads, you must have pushed only merge commits. Some projects like that. It's just an example. You could equally well say no merge commits, and you could have an equivalent. But what this does show you is that during hooks, you can walk your commits, look at the parents, and process things as you want. All of these hooks execute in a sandbox, which is what supple is, and we'll talk about supple in more detail in a future video as well. Okay, so we've seen both the Gitano admin and the refs Gitano admin configuration mechanisms, one global, one local to each repository. We've also seen that Gitano runs commands over SSH. If we ask it for help again, then you'll see that there are plenty of commands here, and there are in fact more than these, but we'll look at these to begin with. Config allows you to change the configuration for a repository. If we ask for help on a command, then Gitano will give us lots of information about that command. As you can see, config takes a repository name, and then it either show, set, del. So we can ask Gitano for the configuration of the Gitano repository. And as you can see, it has a description, a head, and an owner. We can set project.description to another example. And then if we ls-v, then we get another example. Where this gets interesting is that if we pop back into our admin ref and pull, then you'll see that there's been a commit. And if we ask git for the log, then we change the project setting, project.description. What's more, it knows who did it because of the SSH key, and so Gitano has made a commit in my name, making the change. This helps a lot because it means that you don't have to keep checking out administration refs in order to make tweaks to project settings. If we ask for help again, then we can see some more commands. Count objects is basically a forwarding of git count objects. Ditto gc is a forwarding of git gc. Create and destroy allow you to create and destroy repositories. ls we've seen. README views a README file which must be present in the admin ref. This is also what is used by cgit for the about page. We'll see some more about that in a future video. Rename renames a repository, fairly simple. Set description, set head, and set owner are basically shortcuts for the config command for setting project.description, project.head, and project.owner. These are shortcuts, nothing more. They existed before the config command existed, and they may go away. SSH key we've seen briefly allows you to manage SSH keys, and who am I is actually a very useful command because it lets you double check that your Git server is set up properly, because you can say who am I and it will tell you your username, your real name, your email address, the SSH keys that you have, tagging the one that's active with a star, and what groups you are in and what they're called. If you are a Gitano admin, then you want to look at the admin commands. If you ask for help admin, then you'll get those. There are 4 administration commands. User and group do the obvious, they manage users and groups. Graveyard manages what we call the graveyard, which is where destroyed repositories go. And as is like sudo, but for Gitano. So we're going to use this to create a new user, and we're going to give it an SSH key. First of all, I have a user to check that I have an SSH key. Let me just do that. So we have an SSH key, so let's copy that out into /temp, just so that the dsilvers user has access to it. We can read that, and that's that temp user key. So let's create a new user for this. If we ssh git at localhost user help user, then we can get information about how to manage users. So we add a user by saying add, giving it a username, an email address, and a real name. So let's do that now. User add, we'll call it temp at localhost temporary user. Created user temp, and you'll notice that it says it committed it. If we pop back into the Gitano admin repository and pull, then number one, you can see that there's a users temp that contains a user.conf, and if we have a look at that, it's the temp at localhost temporary user entries that we just gave it. And again, if we log, then you'll see that Gitano made that commit in my name. Nice and simple. Now we need to give the temp user an SSH key so that it can do something. This is where the as command comes in. As takes a user and then a command line, and it will run the given command line as that other user. Now you're not allowed to chain ases together. So you say as one user, anything other than as. If you try to run as, Gitano will tell you where to go. So we're going to run as temp SSH key add foobar, and we're going to read from that public key file that we had. Gitano tells us the SSH key file has been updated, and it has. And now, if we become the temp user and we SSH git at localhost who am I, then we are the temporary user. You'll note that we're not in the Gitano admin group. If we therefore ls, we have no access to any repositories. There we go, we have created a new user and shown how it can access things. Next time I'm going to be splitting this Gitano series into two, alternating between hacking on Gitano and configuring or using Gitano. So the hacking series will be about the more deep and meaningfuls of Clod and Lace and Supple, and also what the Gitano codebase looks like and how to set your system up so that you can hack on Gitano and have active live changes for testing. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.